All right, Chaz, let's get right to it. Pitching was the headline for the first day of the playoffs. Tarek Skubal struck out 14 and gave up 1 run. Matthew Boyd in the Cubs bullpen held the Padres to a single run. And Garrett Crochet and Max Fried battled pitch for pitch, and there was a total of 1 run scored off the two of those guys together. On a day when some of the best lineups in baseball scratched and clawed to score 2 runs or even 1 run, the Dodgers put up 10 runs against Hunter Greene and the Reds. The Reds were supposed to have a chance because they can pitch. So how did the Dodgers torpedo the Reds' plan for pitching in game number 1?
Well, I'm going to answer this question about Hunter by starting with Blake Snell, who was terrific. And what Snell is he has a nice velocity fastball for a lefty with a devastating breaking ball, one of my favorite pitches in the game. But then just look at the at-bat against Noelvi Marte, and he did this all game. He had different variations of the changeup. That was kind of the adjustment to the adjustment, the weapon that elevated him to almost unhittable status. Hunter Greene's best pitch is his slider, and his slider wasn't on today. Look at that with Blake Snell. Snell, his top 2 pitches were on, and his third pitch was the one. And Hunter's best pitch just wasn't there. And I was ready for this to be kind of a narrative thing, which I think there's something to. He's had starts in Dodger Stadium where he was amped up. He was so firing early, and he ran out of gas late. I didn't think that was today. What I thought today was Hunter just didn't quite have it. It just wasn't his day. And while that happens for a team that's whole plan is having Hunter when they get there, that's the difference.
Blake Snell was as good against the Reds as those other guys I mentioned, Skubal, Crochet, Fried. He was that good. The Reds scored late. We'll talk about that. But Blake Snell was good. Hunter Greene didn't have his best day. And the Reds can't win a game like that when Hunter Greene doesn't have his best day. Welcome to the playoff edition of Power Stacks. We're proud members of the Growler Podcast Network. A quick recap of the game, Chaz. If you're picking this up on Wednesday morning, a quick recap of the game. Shohei Ohtani homered on the 4th pitch of the game. Teoscar Hernandez and Tommy Edman went back-to-back in the 3rd. And then later in the game, Hernandez and Ohtani did the same thing to Connor Phillips that they did to Hunter Greene, and that is they went deep. 5 Dodgers home runs ends up in a 10-5 game. So after describing Hunter Greene's start and how it went, what did Hunter Greene say post-game when asked about his playoff debut in Los Angeles?
He was very matter of fact. Some of the quotes that were most relevant to me was he just led off by talking about executing the slider. He said he felt even keeled. He never felt fast or sped up. I just wasn't able to execute. He said, I'll have a lot of confidence that I'll be back in this position and we'll be able to come out on top next time. He said he's focusing on the slider, and understandably so. The takeaway I have from this start is more on kind of looking forward from that angle. Hunter, the future Hunter. So let's just call it what it is. This is going to be one of the more defining things we talk about with Hunter until the next time he ends up back on this stage in this spot. Again, let's just call it what it is. Johnny Cueto in 2013 in the Cueto wildcard game, 3 1/3 innings, 4 runs. Hunter Greene tonight, 3 innings, 5 runs. It's the reality of what this game meant and what this game was and the impact on this series. Here's another example too. Someone different, obviously in a much different role on his team. But in game 1 of the 2020 NL wildcard series against the Dodgers, Brent Suter got the start through an inning and 2/3, allowed 3 runs, 5 walks. Terrible day for Brent. One of the more memorable in a obviously extremely negative for him way from his career. That does give him perspective on what Hunter's feeling. And so while Hunter didn't elaborate on that, I wanted to go over to Brent and say, Brent, what do you do with a game like this? Because Brent's also been there. Here's Brent Suter. You've kind of been through what he's been through against the Dodgers. How do you kind of respond to that and bounce back?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's a tall task. It's a tough lineup. They just don't chase. do damage in zone. So yeah, I told him like he left it all out there. When I failed here a couple of years ago, I left it all out there. I just wasn't executing pitches. It was more on me than was on him today for sure. That day, but the news you learn from it. He got bounced back. That offseason, it was heavy at first, but then I used it as fuel to get better. And the next year I went out and had my best year. So I just told him like to use this as fuel. I mean, use this as motivation. Failures to turn into our best teacher. And he's still, I mean, he left it all out there. It just gave up a couple of big home runs. It was just a home run game. But he certainly was leaving it all out there and was normal Hunter Greene, just stuff like just made a couple of mistakes, but was really proud of his effort, proud of all of our efforts today. We had the cockroach mentality. We almost came back, and then we were putting pressure on a big time. Couple, another hit or two. We're tied here. I mean, so we'll respond tomorrow. We've been in this situation before with our back against the wall, and we thrived there. So come back. We'll come out tomorrow and do our best, put our best foot forward in this game.
It's so fresh. And last thing, it's so fresh. Did you tell Hunter you had a similar thing, or you'll tell him?
Yeah, I didn't.
Not yet.
Yeah, but I would definitely. He might have watched it. Yeah, I mean, he might have seen it. It was a nationally televised game as well. So but it's one of those things. It's baseball. Like it's baseball's a very humbling game, and these moments can be you can thrive or you can get knocked down a little bit, but the spotlight of your response. But it's he's got to be all the better for it. Sure, we all are.
Brian, what's it out to you about Hunter and kind of the mindset and the comments there?
Well, what stood out to me is Greene had the same kind of a start just a couple of weeks ago against the A's in that series in Sacramento. I think that was 4 runs and 3 and change. And then he followed that up. The complete game was following that game in Sacramento. And so down the stretch now in his last, 4 to 5 starts, you've seen both ends of what Hunter Greene can offer, the very best of it, and then certainly not his very best, but it came against a Dodgers lineup that's loaded. I mean, that lineup is loaded. When he gave up the home run to Ohtani, I thought, all right, it's Ohtani. It's the playoffs. He met the moment. It's a single run. The Reds are going to be okay if that's what happens. But as you talked about the rest of the game, there were just pitches made, or pitches in the case of Hunter Greene that weren't made, that ended up being the difference in the game. I like your point, and I like Brent Suter's point about using this and looking and evaluating Hunter Greene down the stretch and looking back maybe at this playoff debut as part of what he's on his way to becoming. That didn't help the Reds in game 1. Let's talk about that later. That didn't help the Reds in game 1. They have to find a way to get back in it in game 2. And the pitching from this point, it's going to be very different. We'll talk about that coming up in just a bit. But for Hunter Greene, I don't, like you said, I don't think this is an awful day. It just came at a bad time for him and the Reds to open this series in what was supposed to be this team's strength going into the playoffs, that if they were to contend with some of the better teams in the National League, they had to pitch. They just had to pitch, and it didn't happen in game 1.
And you just keep going back to that because Blake Snell was awesome. We'll talk about Brian Hayes and all that kind of stuff, but entering the day, this was Hunter's day. Exiting the game, this was Hunter's day. And for everything that happened after that, it all was tied to Hunter's start. Scott Barlow pitched well, but Scott Barlow, Connor Phillips, and Brent Suter pitched because the Reds were down by as much as they were. And the Dodgers started out with their lower leverage guys because they were up by so much. And then, Terry Francona, and let's segue to this. Terry Francona pulls Austin Hayes using the explanation of them being down 8 runs and wanting to do right by Hayes and be fair to Hayes so that Austin Hayes could be in the lineup again tomorrow, getting him off his feet so you can get a better version of Austin today. That kind of feels like, I don't know, similar stake, similar style as like putting Barlow into that game instead of Santillan. All of that happens because they were down 8. Once you got to that, and I'll use it, let's just kind of get here now with the Hayes stuff. What I kind of understand enough is them keeping Hayes in to hit with the bases loaded. Brian Hayes, that would be at the end of that big 8th inning. It was Hayes versus Espinal. I'm fine sticking with Brian Hayes in that situation. That's life. Pulling Austin Hayes became, in retrospect, the big mistake. Again, it was the same vein of move as putting Brent Suter into the game in the first place in terms of looking towards tomorrow. But that is what took away the flexibility on the bench for them to be able to do what they did. Why didn't Sal hit for Cabrian when they were down 8? That would be most likely because, well, you're going to pull Austin anyway. So now are you bringing in an extra guy off your bench and burning an extra guy on your bench in a game they're down 8 runs? Now I would have just hit. What I would have done was just hit for Cabrian Hayes as soon as Hunter was out of the game. There was an at bat there. I would have just hit Sal then before it had been completely off the rails later in that game, and you were pulling Austin anyway. That's the move I would have made. But how it transpired from there was just a product of the score, which was a product of Hunter.
Reds scored 5 runs in the 7th and the 8th. There were some good at-bats. They forced LA to use 5 relievers, including Blake Trinan, in the game. And as you watch those at-bats, you can say, hey, it's too little too late. And it was. That's the fact of the matter. But what they accomplished potentially, is this their best chance in game 2 against the Dodgers bullpen? Because the Dodgers bullpen has been suspect, to say the least, and the Reds just ran through a few of them in a blowout game. How does that impact game 2?
Significantly. Significantly with what they saw, with even some of the momentum. Like, I think the Reds just kind of needed to scratch across a few runs to even go into tomorrow with kind of their heads hung high, or heads held high in that way. From a bullpen perspective too, I mean, like Scott Barlow helped save the bullpen. They used Ashcraft in the 9th because it became more of a leverage spot, but I think he'll be fine for tomorrow. And then because they were able to stay away from some of their guys, they're now do or die available for the final 2 games of this series. So that was kind of the math equation there. I mean, the classic example is, I believe, Terry Francona using Wakefield in game 4 in like the 04 World Series to keep the top bullpen guys fresh for the rest of that series. Now, again, the one you want to have back is Austin Hayes pulling in that way. But the moments in that 8th, I loved Sal Stewart drawing the walk and then flipping his bat. Like, that was sick. That was classic Sal. And even post game, I felt like the lineup was in a more confident spot because they did show that they could scratch some stuff together. Now, tomorrow, what I expect from LA, though, is I expect more of their starters. I believe it would be potentially Sheehan and Sasaki. If you need more length after Yamamoto, or a bit of a bridge there, so it would be a different look than the lefties the Reds saw today until you get to Trinan. But intangibly, I think the way they closed out the game had some good to it.
All right. I know you talked to Sal Stewart too. Where did that go?
Yeah, I talked to Sal Stewart about that 8th and kind of some of these topics that I'm hitting on. Here's my quick conversation with Sal Stewart post. Kind of what was the vibe as the team started to get back in the game?
Nothing, just string along good at bats. The score was obviously lopsided, so we needed to put a long inning together and put good at bats together. So we were able to use some of their bullpen arms, and that'll be good heading into tomorrow.
Also, just the at bats you guys work. What can that do for you guys kind of heading into tomorrow?
Yeah, nothing, just continue to take good at bats. Make them throw it over the white and control the zone. So they're obviously great pitchers, but those are good at bats going into tomorrow.
And now looking to tomorrow, we can get there more if you want. Like, what is Sal's role tomorrow? How does the offense defense matrix work tomorrow? What's the confidence level with Sal at third? How important is it to get a Miguel Andujar in the lineup again? What would that mean for someone like Noelvi Marte? Like, tomorrow's a pretty tricky lineup to put together, in my opinion. But then the bullpen, we know how that's going to look. coming off of whatever Zach Littell gives you to open it.
Yeah, so as you said, Yoshinobu Yamamoto tomorrow for the Dodgers, Zach Littell for the Reds. I think tomorrow will look a lot like Littell's last few starts. Probably shorter, though, unless he just comes out on fire. And his last few starts haven't been more than 4 or 5 innings. He could pitch well and be done after 3 or 4 innings, depending on how the game is going and how Terry Francona sees it. But with everyone that the Reds will have in the bullpen and the way Terry Francona manages these games, you know that he's not thinking about game 3 tomorrow. He's going to go all in and push all his chips in to win game 2 if they have that opportunity. Thinking about Yamamoto, he saw the Reds back in July, 7 innings, 1 run. It was one of those kinds of starts. And so the Reds have seen him once, didn't have any
They beat him
success,
last year.
and they'll see him again tomorrow in game 2. But I'm just saying that's a tall task given how well and how consistently he's pitched over the course of this season. And he's pitched and started and been better than anybody else on that staff.
So kind of the full game 2 preview. Looking at the pitching, it's essentially going to be all hands on deck. I asked Terry Francona, why not just go with a bullpen day? And he said there's no rule on how long Zach Littell has to pitch.
Right.
Chase Burns and Nick Lodolo are going to be huge factors. And Ashcraft, Santana, and Pagan, they've been your 7th and 8th and 9th guys all season in those innings. So if Burns and Lodolo can give you 2, and Ashcraft, Pagan, and Santillan can give you 3, well, then if you're winning, that accounts for 7 innings. If you're winning, that would be 7 of the 9 innings. If you're losing, that would be 7 of the 8 innings. So, especially if you're down, you don't need much at a Zach Littell. I think 1 trip through the order would be a huge success before you would then pass it to Burns and Lodolo, and then your leverage guys to close it out. Looking at the lineup, Terry Francona spoke post-game about how important it was to get Austin Hayes available to play game 2. Like I mentioned, what will they do at third base? That's the big thing right now. Brian Hayes 1 for 2 with a walk-off Yamamoto. I asked pregame on Tuesday Francona about starting Hayes over Stewart. Here's the quote from Francona. He said, "We have our guy that started on opening day and Hunter Greene on the mound." He said, "I'm not claiming to be Abner Doubleday. I just think with who's pitching, let's put our best defense out there with the guys we have to face lefties, facing a lefty. It's the same calculus facing a righty with these 2. He said, "I just hate to not catch the ball and have it to be my fault. I try to help." That quote especially, plus the idea that I think McLean's playing a bit better, makes me feel more like it'll be Hayes and McLean in the infield. But then in the outfield, where they have been leaning less athleticism and upside, and since Lux has been catching the ball, and since Lux pinch hit for Marte as well in the 9th on Tuesday, that's in my head. Marte's in a bit of a slump. I loved the walk he worked. This is a very tough decision for them, let alone for my stupid lineup projection. But my lineup projection is Friedel, Steer, Lux, Andujar, Ellie, Stevenson, Hayes, McLean. Essentially 3 spots for Andujar, Hayes, and McLean, along with Benson, Stewart, and Marte. Because of Lux pitch hitting for Marte, because of Brian Hayes' infield defense, and then Benson just hasn't been playing as much recently. Andujar's hot. Hayes versus Stewart still the one I hang up on, but going back to that Abner Doubleday quote has me leaning with Hayes over Stewart to start. We'll see what happens.
This has been the Cincinnati Reds. They can't kill us. We don't go away. They've got a game to prove that in game 2. You go from the elation of the post-game celebration in Milwaukee, a little travel and a day, and now you're facing the end of your season shortly after you celebrated the extension of your season into the playoffs. This has been who they are, and they're going to have an opportunity to prove it in game 2. Chaz, we've gotten this far into the show, and I have yet to compliment you on your playoff tie. Your playoff necktie is a lovely touch for being in Los Angeles. I just have to compliment you.
Unfortunately, I packed 2 ties, and the other tie I packed doesn't match the shirt I packed. So we're just like the Reds bullpen, scrambling all hands on deck for different game 2 and game 3 scenarios.
All right, man. Great work. And we'll do another playoff edition of Power Stacks after game number 2. Win or go home for Terry Francona in the Cincinnati Reds. Chaz, a final thought from you to wrap it up tonight.
Do the Reds, again, prioritize offense or defense? That's the thing that's sticking on my mind. The idea of defense was directly connected as well to it being Hunter Greene's day, which it wasn't today, and I'll leave it at that. We've talked about all this stuff, but this was Hunter Greene's moment, and he didn't have a slider. And that's something that's probably just going to stick with him. And, we'll see what happens next time he's back in a spot like this.
All right, then. Chaz, thanks. Producer Kent, thanks. Late night playoff baseball, late night Power Stacks. Thanks for checking it out. We'll see you again tomorrow night.